Hey guys, welcome to Office Hours. I'm Davis Hunt, editor-in-chief of the Pamphleteer. If you've watched this before, we're doing it a little different now. You'll notice a bunch of fancy bells and whistles here. But previously, we put these things out on Friday afternoons, which quickly became apparent that everyone was checked out on Friday, and that probably not the best time to put out a show. So what we did was we broke it out into three separate shows, one of which comes out on Friday, but it's related to more cultural stuff, less newsy political stuff. So we've got a schedule that I'll pop up here that you can take a look at there. So Davis Hunt's Office Hours, that's what you're viewing right now, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Tomorrow night, Megan Lee is going to do her segment, Nashville Savvy, covering more Nashville specific stuff. This show is going to be kind of a mix of Nashville and broader cultural things. I mean, today, for example, I'm interviewing Nathan Worcester from the Epoch Times about the upcoming presidential election. He's covered Vivek Ramaswamy, whose campaign is kind of interesting. So we're going to be talking about that. And then Fridays, Jared is going to talk about movies mostly. So that's the new schedule. We'll put all these out on YouTube. We'll break out the some clips and buzzy stuff from that and distribute them as Megan is at noon on Thursday, apparently. I need to update my information. So that's how we're doing it from now on. Three separate shows, 3 days, covering a spectrum of stuff. This is kind of the lead-off show. Megan tomorrow covering Nashville-specific news and politics. And Friday, Jared getting into more cultural stuff, particularly movies. He's our resident film critic. So now that's out of the way. The way that we start out this show is that we're going to talk about this past week at the Pamphleteer. I'm just going to run you down some interesting news items and just bits of information that we found compelling from this past week. The first thing that happened was about a week ago, The Atlantic put out a piece, the headline of which was, "Is Tennessee Still a Democracy?" It was written by Anne Applebaum, who is a highly respected journalist in those circles and has spent most of her career covering politics and such in Eastern Europe, and drew a comparison between political trends in Tennessee and what's going on in Hungary, which is widely reported to be indicative of democracy dying or some other variant of that term. What we put out a piece, I guess it was a week from today, that kind of drew attention to the fact that despite what Applebaum and such critics of Tennessee politics are saying, people continue to move to the state. Nashville's growth has been consistent since 2016. It took a bit of a dive. Middle Tennessee took a bit of a dive during COVID, but there was an article that came out in the Business Journal yesterday that reported on some Census Bureau data showing that we've recovered to 2016 levels, which is when you used to see all those headlines about 100 people moving to the Nashville region a day, not the city, the region. This includes surrounding counties like Rutherford and Williamson County. Another interesting stat on that front about people moving here is that the number of children between the ages of 0 and 4 increased in Tennessee between 2020 and 2022. And there were only 5 other states where this happened. That was Idaho, North and South Carolina, I believe Utah. I don't have the map in front of me, but it was either Utah or I think it was Utah. That would make sense. And Tennessee. And it's kind of a weird stat. It's not a fertility rate stat, but it does show that people are moving here and forming families and bringing their young children here with the plan of either of raising their families here or have had children over that course of time. And all that kind of underscores Anne Applebaum's attack on Tennessee as being not a democracy. If we're to take what she says at her word, maybe being a democracy is not what we should strive for. Just saying. People seem to like what Tennessee's doing, even despite all the negative press. Another bit of interesting news was it came out that Justin Jones raised $1 million after being ousted from the Tennessee House of Representatives. And we broke down those numbers. Very easy to do. You just put it all in a spreadsheet, sort by, where the person was from. They have their address. in there, and you can see the amount. So 16% of the $1 million, the approximately $1 million that he raised, came from within the state of Tennessee, and 11% of total donors were from Tennessee. So, I mean, it probably obvious, but most of Jones' money came from outside the state of Tennessee. I mean, big surprise there. Arena football is coming to Nashville again. If you remember back in, I don't remember. I grew up going to the Nashville Cats football games. I thought they were awesome. I also just love the logo of the Nashville Cats. We're going to have arena football back. They tried to bring it back between 2007 and 2011, I think. It didn't really catch. But I guess they're going to give it another go. I think maybe there's a bigger appetite for football than I'm aware of. Arena football is more fun than NFL football in a lot of ways, just because the fields are shorter. And, I mean, there's walls on the sideline. So guys are getting wrecked into walls or it's been a while since I've watched a game, but that's something to keep an eye out on if you're a football guy. Another bit of information. You see, I got this pad where I write all this stuff down. The turnout for this Metro general election has been abysmally low, and breakdown of people showing up to polling locations shows that the only two polling locations that are tracking with 2019's turnout, which was also low, are the Green Hills Library and the Belmead City Hall. So that's West Nashville, to those of you that aren't totally familiar with kind of the geography of the city. And that typically is where, more entrenched residents that have lived in the city longer. It's the wealthier part of town. And I think that's a fairly interesting trend to observe. Freddie O'Connell's been leading all of the polls that we've seen. There have been 3. The most recent one showed him at 21%. And leading, the next highest was Alice Raleigh, who we've endorsed at the Pamphleteer. And then after that was Matt Wiltshire, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Matt Wiltshire. Might have been Yarborough, but I'm pretty sure it was Wiltshire. You'll have to double check me on that. This is live. We don't do fact checks. You can't do fact checks live. You have to go back and do that. That's up to y'all. So anyway, point is that turnout in that part of Nashville seems to counteract what we've seen in polls, if I had to sketch a guess. Next, Jared published an excellent review of the Barbie movie. I know you're tired of hearing about the Barbie movie. I am too. Frankly, I'm kind of a sucker for people just taking apart stuff, like a movie. I think it says something about where we stand as a culture, how we digest these things and how we process them. And Jared had some pretty pointed opinions. I'll just read the last paragraph, which I think kind of sums up his whole review. Ultimately, the problem Barbie highlights is not wokeness. It's that our most vocal cultural critics are incapable of seeing a movie that offers a multifaceted interrogation of the issues of our time for what it is. Barbie is for everyone, and Gerwig has reminded us that the cinema can be inside of common ground if only we let it. It's an honest review of the movie. Barbie kind of became this cultural lightning rod for people to sound off and kind of flex their political credentials on what they believe. I'm the last guy that would disagree with some of the cultural developments that have happened, but I do think that it hurts more than it helps to spend such stunting on a movie for I don't know what, for Gibbs or something. It's not really clear to me why people just kind of impulsively see movies and use them as rallying points to make some point. Anyway, Jared says it a lot better than I did. That's why they don't pay me the big bucks to review movies. And the last thing I'll note before we move on is that the racetrack deal, redeveloping the racetrack at the Nashville Fairgrounds, is probably dead in the water for this term. I've heard that from people close to the situation. Megan has reported on that as well. She wrote in this morning's newsletter about last night's public hearing at the fairgrounds. And that's something that we'll probably see shelved until the next mayor takes over. So worth tracking. For the record, I do think that something needs to be done with the racetrack. I don't think that taxpayer dollars should go towards it. I think there's almost universal consensus behind that. And as with the Titan Stadium, it's more a question of finding a deal that works for the city and less about actually redeveloping, the property. So that's all I got to say about last week. You turn out so much stuff, you kind of lose track. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about before we move on to my interview with Nathan, which I recorded earlier today, so we're just going to throw that up, and I'm going to go have a drink or something. Is the mayor's race? Nashville. I wrote about this. I think it was Tuesday. See, you can't remember. Or maybe no, it was last week. It was Thursday last week. Trying to contextualize where we are as a city and what the mayoral race says about that. And the way that I see it, there's basically three types of candidates. Or hold on, let me rephrase that. The leading candidate is Freddie O'Connell, who's running on a populist platform of making the city more livable. You hear a lot about sidewalks, you hear a lot about affordable housing, you hear a lot about public transit, that kind of thing. He's very concerned with the granular aspects of people that live in Nashville. The other candidates appear to speak more distantly. We've endorsed Alice Raleigh because it's my opinion that we are at kind of a crucial crossroads for the city in which we need to nail some fundamental things like our school system, getting the police force staffed up, and addressing the fiscal stability of the city. All things that other candidates have either taken an approach that we wouldn't agree, that I don't think will be effective, or have ignored entirely. Alice is pretty good on all three of those, and I'm not going to. Well, maybe I will. So on the police, Alice is about the only one that you'll hear use rhetoric like, we need to work more to protect the victims and not the criminals. Most of the candidates have kind of danced around addressing crime that way. Nashville's a very blue city, and so soft on crime rhetoric is going to go a further way. It's also very segregated. Most of the crime is concentrated in North Nashville. It occasionally spills over into neighborhoods, but most of the crime is downtown North Nashville, divorced from other parts of the city. There are East Nashville struggles with it too. It's fairly gentrified. It's been in the process of being gentrified for 2 decades now, I guess, and they still have issues. But if you live on the west side, you're kind of distant from it. And, as I was saying earlier, those are the people that have turned out in full force to vote this time around. Second is on schools. Our schools in Nashville perform very poorly. You saw all the news about the third grade retention law. There was a lot of press around that. The schools badly need to be improved. Alice is the only one that's indicated that she's willing to take aggressive measures to do that, which she's talked about stepping in for the school board should it prove that that's necessary. Fifth is dealing with the debt. The common Republican line about government fiscal policy is that it's a spending problem always, and that you need to cut spending. Alice hems to that. No other candidates do. So anyway, that's why we support Alice. As far as the rest of the field goes, it came out. There was a great article in the Tennessee Lookout today by Adam Friedman that talked about, kind of gave an analysis of the Titan Stadium deal and talked about, basically framed the story as the Adams family spending a couple of $1 million investment in lobbying into a $1 billion stadium deal, which I found to be pretty interesting framing. But it also relayed that Heidi Campbell and Jeff Yarborough, two candidates for mayor, voted in favor of the stadium deal that has basically come to define the entire race. There's not the top three candidates have indicated that they oppose the deal and that they would not have supported it. And they're polling higher than everyone else. So I think I'm all talked out about all that stuff. I'm going to put up my interview with Nathan Worcester next. We talked about, in particular, Vivek Ramaswamy, some other candidates. There's been some news coming out of the Ron DeSantis camp about how his campaign is managed that's interesting, to say the least. And So here's my chat with Nathan. Is a national politics reporter for the Epoch Times. Nathan has been on our show before in its older forms. Back when we did a podcast, I believe he was on. We've had a lot of different forms. This is our latest. Nathan's here, and he's got a fantastic beard, as you'll see. Nathan, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely nice to be back. Although I guess there's no Red Scare host who's going to join us this time.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. not unless something happens outside of my control, which I don't think it will. So Nathan, you've been covering the presidential race at this point. It seems like you've done a lot of covering of Vivek Ramaswamy, and I've noticed Vivek has kind of surged in the polls recently. I think there was a Harvard poll that showed him receiving 10% of support, which was a significant departure from previous polls, which show him more kind of around 4 or 5%. Having covered his campaign, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm more interested in the aggregators at this point, looking at Real Clear Politics or 538. There has definitely been an upward trend, and I think it's just a testimony to the fact that he's much better at retail politics and at just doing the work of going around in these states than people initially thought. I think he is kind of a polarizing person. Some people just look at him and they think, okay, this is like a snake oil salesman, or this is the music man. And that's, I think, especially in politics, and especially when you have someone who is coming in this kind of anti-woke entrepreneur mode, it can be very understandable to look at that and think, okay, how is he positioning himself, maybe not to be president, but to create his next Strive asset management or whatever. But if you actually have paid attention to his messaging, I think that there is an element of genuine commitment to a particular kind of ethic within a faction of our current elite that involves opening up the Overton window on issues where it actually matters. So, for example, on merit, I don't know if you saw, but he blurbed Richard Hanania's new book. So he's willing to, I think, talk about issues, talk about affirmative action, talk about climate policy, a million other things in a way that generally is more intelligent and has more substance than most of his competitors, and that that frankly makes for a more interesting candidate to follow than I would just say Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. Not to
what
pick
about
on
Asa
them.
Hutchinson? That guy is thrilling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Watching Tucker Carlson bat him around like a cat or something. At Iowa Forum was painful, but that's just you look at Ramaswamy and he really is adept in the whatever media age we're in now.
He did very well at that forum. I watched that. I was in the car, but I put it up on my dashboard and clued into all those. And it was like him and Nikki Haley did the best, I think. It seemed like he had it out for Pence and Hutchinson. Not that they are compelling candidates at all to me personally, but Vivek and Nikki, and they're also the youngest. Vivek's campaign kind of reminds me a bit of Andrew Yang's, and he's got that similar kind of youthful energy. He's like the polar opposite of Andrew Yang in a lot of ways, because Andrew Yang's big plank was universal basic income, and Vivek seems to be a little more a champion of kind of freedom and self-reliance in the old American fashion than Yang was. You think what's changed about the political climate where the young exciting guy, I guess he's running in the opposition party, so maybe that's it. But why? I don't know. I've considered he's different. Does he have any crossover with kind of what Andrew Yang had stirred up?
I mean, that's a very good question. And to your point, I think both of them are doing a slightly different version of technofuturism. Andrew Yang, for better or for worse, is moving in more of a, I'll just say broadly statist direction. And Ramaswamy there's a very strong element of libertarianism in his pitch. Now, how widely does that appeal to millennials, to Gen Z, beyond like college Republicans or something? Frankly, I haven't seen enough like polling data. I haven't really had enough of a chance to assess that. On the other hand, I do have like friends who are not on the right, who will share the occasional Ramaswamy op-ed in the Post or whatever. So I think he's at least registering in people's minds, and people generally don't look at him and think, this is someone who is irrelevant in terms of the message that he's broadcasting. So yeah, when I look at him and when I compare him to Andrew Yang, and I've actually reached out to some of the Yang campaign veterans to get a sense of whether they think he's going to be a similar phenomenon, whether he's going to be like a Marco Rubio who peaked early in the polls in 2016 and then faded away. And, I think that there are some pretty important differences insofar as Andrew Yang really was this one issue candidate focused on automation. Ramaswamy has made a few issues central, but it seems like he's building towards a more coherent thesis, and he's using policies and combining that with a lot of on the ground campaigning beyond that heavy internet presence to certainly within the GOP primary field to make people aware of him, of his. I'll give you an example. He's already outlined exactly how he says he's going to disassemble the Department of Education and the FBI and also the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, going back to the techno-futurist angle, making this explicit pro-nuclear pitch in a more aggressive way than some Republicans have. But then he has also said that he's going to be outlining exactly which executive authorities would allow him to do all this stuff without congressional authorization. And that's an area where I think anybody looking at it would have some reasonable skepticism about, okay, even if there's hypothetically a legal case to be made, are they going to let you do any of this? Is that ever going to actually happen in Washington, D.C.? But he's not simply saying, hey, automation is an issue, we should get you universal basic income. That's maybe not the fairest characterization of the Yang campaign, but it really was such like a meme candidacy. And from what I can tell, Ramaswamy, I wanted to get into the ways in which he's actually departure from, Trump style America first and those planks. But, he seems to be trying to create the impression, at least, that he's the next natural evolution of a more comprehensive vision.
Yeah. So I saw him speak. I was in Miami for the Bitcoin conference, and I saw him speak there. And, kind of just observing how that conference has evolved. And they had Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, and Ramaswamy, who were kind of these fringe, I guess fringe is the right word, fringe presidential candidates from the past and present. And all of them, had slightly different reasons for supporting Bitcoin. But it occurred to me that, you would see some kind of political coalition uniting around these kind of core freedom or decentralized issues like Bitcoin. Abolishing the Department of Education, I think, is another one. And like Vivek I noticed even talks about decentralizing the education system as being his reasoning for abolishing the Department of Education. And that's a talking point that you hear in Tennessee state and federal politics too. Like all the candidates that ran for Congress in the Tennessee 5th Congressional District, which was this crowded field, most of them, I would say, were in favor of abolishing the Department of Education. And so, it's interesting that he's picked up on those. I don't know as much about the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, and I guess we could get into the FBI, but his reasoning for that is that the Nuclear Regulatory Committee has prevented the construction of nuclear power plants. Is there any more to it? Are they just just red tape in the way?
Yeah, in terms of the policy stance that he's outlined and his reasoning, that's basically it. The NRC is this, and I think it is fair if you compare the U.S. to other countries, when you look at the timeline for completing a reactor period, let alone some of the new reactor designs that have come out that are even safer than what we already have in our fleet. It seems pretty clear that the agency is mainly functioning as a source of delay, or at least whatever appropriate precautions exist for nuclear power apparently exist in other countries, while at the same time not hindering technological progress. So, And when you mentioned the DOE, yeah, that's obviously become a huge issue. In Iowa and in New Hampshire, there have been these signature pieces of legislation. In particular, Kim Reynolds in Iowa was touting this with all the candidates who she's appeared with. Yeah, maybe it's kind of a common talking point, but I really do think that the whole pandemic response and remote learning led a lot of parents to kind of question not even just the like more culture war issues, like trans stuff in education, but I think the general way in which education is done in this country through the public system. I think parents, for a variety of reasons, look at that and they think, maybe there's a better way to go about it that would allow people to make more choices as families, would allow people to actually, hopefully do a better job in terms of teaching their kids. But that's one of those issues where, yeah, I think the more maybe libertarian streak, that's a kind of a loaded word, but let's say decentralized liberty-oriented streak. I think there's a natural advantage there with a broad swath of the electorate. Although, of course, there are still people who hear about hear about the DOE being abolished or something, and they just think this is
and they tremble. They get scared. They get scared. That's literally the response. They're frightened. I mean, I don't understand it. But one thing that came to mind there was in his focus on education, DeSantis has kind of defined his whole campaign around the culture war of defeating wokeness. And Vivek has also addressed wokeness. But how do you think his and DeSantis's approach to addressing wokeness, which maybe we should define that first, but is different or more or less effective?
Yeah, unfortunately, defining woke could be, one person can do it in 20 words, another person would take 20 minutes. But let's just say response to some of the more radical cultural currents over the past decade or so, because that's generally what people mean. And I think, there's a case to be made that DeSantis, as opposed to Ramaswamy, is maybe less in terms of messaging, but just what he can say he's done. He has actually, led the way in passing and signing legislation in Florida on a variety of issues. But, a lot of that stuff has been challenged in the courts and has obviously come with a fair amount of blowback from the media and from people in Florida. So Ramaswamy is he's not running so hard on that, I think. Again, he comes back to issues like, merit and affirmative action, I think, is an alternative to just the kind of, again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but let's just say the kind of stereotypical conservative media headlines around,
the books or
exactly.
The teachers trying to radical. I mean, which are not misplaced concerns, I would think. But so I saw DeSantis speak recently too, and I've seen him speak twice now. I saw him speak at NatCon in 2022, and I saw him a couple of weeks ago at the Tennessee Statesman's dinner. And his use of what does he say? Woke mind virus. His use of that has been consistent over that year, I think, and I don't think it's gotten any more effective. And as much as this stuff does underlie, a big anxiety for some people, for voters, particularly those with children, I don't know that it resonates. It's kind of, maybe he needs a new word. But I also have not picked up, Vivek talks about that stuff, but he doesn't underscore it as much as DeSantis has.
No, he has a few signature lines. He'll talk about corporate America blowing woke smoke, as he calls it, to prevent people from focusing on, and that that makes people chuckle the first time they hear it. So
that's his anti-ESG position, right? Is that
he has a strong anti-ESG position, and in fact, at that same NatCon last year, there was a very interesting debate that took place between Theo Wald, who's a Trump administration veteran, and someone from Strive, the Ramaswamy company, not Vivek himself, but focused on some of these differences, I would say, in terms of the view of capitalism. More, let's just say more broadly, like, how does the market exist? Who does it serve? Should we have just a kind of a pure Milton Friedman, like in the purest sense, neoliberal understanding of what a company does, that is to say, serves the interests of shareholders? Or is it possible to embed separate values? And at that point, you do get into things that, even if they're not ESG, they can be, in the vein of ESG, in the vein of values-based capitalism, which again, like I can certainly understand the aversion to that, but Theo Wald was arguing for the less Friedmanite position, in particular on issues like ensuring that companies in the United States actually act in the interest of the United States and don't do things like work to outsource jobs or trash the environment. That's an area where I think when you start looking at a national race, the more classic America First message from Trump, certainly in terms of the messaging, and certainly as represented by a panel like that, I think it might have more resonance than what Ramaswamy is presenting. He also recently on his podcast, he spoke with Orrin Cass of American Compass and made a case not for onshoring, but for nearshoring. When it comes to China, he's fairly hawkish on trade, but then he'll say we really shouldn't undermine these relationships with Japan, with India, with our other allies and partners. That's not like an unreasonable position, but I think it's important to draw out these differences and really think about, how does this meaningfully set him apart from someone like Trump, or even from someone like DeSantis, whose trade policies I'm less familiar with, but which I could imagine are maybe a little less neoliberal.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a realistic path through which he gets elected. Unless, obviously, I guess we'll see, but.
Ramaswamy or DeSantis?
Ramaswamy.
Yeah, I certainly wonder if in the event that Trump is not in the race a few months from now, if Ramaswamy is going to be able to position himself as the inheritor. And that's, whatever he says, that's my sense of certainly how he might benefit from the campaign that he's run, which, like, really just in terms of strategy, it seems like an obvious, brilliant thing that if you're trying to convince Republicans who generally really like the former president to vote for you, you probably shouldn't trash the former president or have your digital surrogates who are like 2 degrees removed from you trash the former president. It just seems obvious that maybe you should. And again, not every candidate has been quite so aggressive, but just to me, it doesn't seem like at this stage it makes a lot of sense to go so aggressively anti-Trump, unless you're someone like Chris Christie, who is really running for the broader CNN audience and maybe some hypothetical no labels American out there.
Chris Christie, gosh. I love that Trump tweet where he shows Chris Christie getting food at the buffet. Do you know which one I'm talking about? And he's like,
yes.
I can't remember what the tweet is, but man, just a legendary tweet. Like Chris Christie eating like to fill the hole in his heart or something like that. It's just the funniest tweet. It's like something that I would tweet when I was in college or something. And, not that I've matured that much since then, but I think I have a little bit. Well, okay. Let's. I want to tie up this conversation about Vivek, and then we can talk more generally about. You just brought up indirectly DeSantis's campaign strategy, at least reflected through some of his recent actions, or some of his campaign's recent actions, I should say. But so another interesting thing that, Vivek, he of course he supports trying to find a peaceful resolution to the war between Russia and Ukraine, and has been open about that, knowing that it may or may not be popular with the base. What is, I don't know the answer to that question. What is the GOP base, by your reckoning, feelings on the war? I mean, is it really as unified as everyone just opposing it simply because they're mailing dollars to Ukraine, or is there something more, another dimension to it?
I mean, I think there's nuance, but there's a reason that the Tucker Carlson paleo-conservative message on so many issues led to those high ratings, because a lot of that does correspond to how many people, even beyond the GOP base, let's say independents who might find themselves voting for a Republican presidential candidate, how they think about the issue. And I think you will run into some people who make the Mearsheimer style arguments about, NATO commitments, and you'll then run into people who I would say are a little closer to the Washington majority Republican view, which tends to be more in favor of the continuation of U.S. involvement in that conflict. But I mean, having spoken to a lot of people at these events, my general sense is that there's some of that broad skepticism of U.S. involvement in the conflict, especially based upon the last few decades, but then also the Biden family ties to Burisma and other issues. That I think there's just a general cynicism about the conflict and about who stands to benefit.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty popular position. I was reading the recap of your coverage of the Iowa thing, and Tucker Carlson said that's not a popular position. But I guess what he meant was that's not a popular position to support a peace resolution within the establishment GOP that occupies Washington. That must be what he was referencing.
Yeah, that's what he meant. Which is, again, it's a very intelligent thing to do if you are an adept populist, as Tucker Carlson is, to be able to say this is what a lot of people out there believe, but it's certainly not how the decision makers in Washington D.C. on key Senate and House committees, certainly, but also more broadly in that like ecosystem of think tanks and military contractors and whatnot. That's not how they think about the issue, and so it's there's a reason that resonates with people.
So another interesting thing that I saw, and this was kind of gimmicky to me, but it does, I don't know, like his letting fundraisers keep 10% of the money they raise. And then Asa Hutchinson copied him on that, I think. Are there any other, you mentioned before we went live that there were some other like underexplored parts of his platform. That's a tiny one, but I didn't know if there were any other that we run down the list that I have. Is there any other issues that Vivek has interesting or compelling positions on that you think people are resonating?
So it's been interesting for me to see him on immigration position himself as both very hawkish on illegal immigration, talking about the use of the military in order to better secure the southern border, while at the same time, I think presenting a fairly strong vision of a propositional United States. And that's an element of his policy on voting, for example, explicitly saying that this civics test that young people would need to be able to pass to vote before they're 25, that's similar to what legal immigrants have to pass. Why shouldn't people who exercise the franchise have to know as much as legal immigrants? He's spoken about bringing in people based upon merit. He's said that merit isn't just a matter of academic credentials, that it's also a matter of patriotism or of commitment to the country in a serious way. And then he's said that he would like to have an immigration system, a points-based system like the one in Canada or Australia or some of these other countries. That's not necessarily a set of ingredients that would lead to a lower overall rate of immigration. Certainly people looking at recent developments in the Biden administration strategy when it comes to the southern border might say, well, you can configure a system such that the number of illegal immigrants goes down because you're awarding more pieces of paper. You're making more people who would have otherwise been illegal immigrants legal. And then you can also say, well, if you have a pure points-based system without a well-defined upper bound, where does that leave you in a few years? Is that just going to lead to a similar situation, except with a few definitions different? I mean, I think it's reasonable to look at that and kind of marvel again that he has been able to, present himself as hawkish on illegal immigration, which, he certainly is. But it's an issue worth tracking, I would say, among many others. And another one where I think he might be distinct from Trump.
Yeah, he's a first-gen American, right?
He is. Yeah, no, both of his parents were legal immigrants to Ohio. So another thing to watch out for is just if you look at his major donors, a lot of them are, people he's worked with in Ohio for various ventures or other people from local politics there. His team includes a lot of people who are veterans of the Ohio political scene.
I'm familiar with where he went to high school in Cincinnati. It's so bizarre to me that he's from Cincinnati. I just think knowing anyone from Cincinnati, it's always you don't meet a whole lot of those, much less running for president. So, okay, so you mentioned this earlier. The Ron DeSantis campaign, there was a couple of things that happened recently. They've trimmed down his campaign staff pretty significantly. They put out this, I mean, I think I probably spend too much time on Twitter, so I just get filtered this information, and I have a hard time having a real idea of what is actually going on with voters. I think what the Twitter intelligentsia has seemed to arrive at is that DeSantis's campaign is ineffective and too online. And you saw that with like the release of that video with the Sonorand in it, which, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And Nate Hochman was let go, and there was a report today that he's the one that made the video. And then another guy, Will Chamberlain, who's got a fairly big presence online, publisher of Human Events with Jack Posobiec, was also let go. And going into the DeSantis campaign, he's an interesting candidate. I mean, he's got this like insanely good track record of solving a lot of the issues that we confronted over the past 2 or 3 years, especially related to education and clamping down on woke corporations and whatever you want to say. It seems like his platform would resonate heavily, and maybe we're just early in polling. I mean, what do you make of how his campaign has gone so far?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is this early stage jitters, maybe that could be part of it. Certainly, I think there might be in some elements, not of the Twitter intelligentsia, but let's just say like the way that this is framed by the media and by any publicists who are adept at getting a particular message out there, discrediting him at an early stage. Certainly, if you want to discredit alternatives to Trump, whether there's Republicans or Democrats, whoever else are doing that, that would certainly serve their interests. I look at DeSantis's campaigning, and this is another sort of Trump talking point, but I think there is something to it. There's a lot of talk of a ground game, and I've certainly seen, volunteers at events. I've seen a pro DeSantis presence. In fact, I've seen just a lot of people at events who will come up and say, I like DeSantis. But I don't think he needs to really hit the ground running somewhat more aggressively. I think that getting his name out there so early, it remains to be seen what happens. For now, it looks like his numbers have taken a nosedive, that he's faltered a bit. Maybe it would have been smarter for him to maintain more of a sense of mystery, avoid that book tour that he went on, and really just start campaigning hard over the summer. Of course, that would have opened up more space for the former president to continue to consolidate support, not that he was necessarily lacking it. What I think would have been really smart for DeSantis would have been to just completely, not just him, but through his surrogates, through people associated with him, avoid as much as possible antagonizing Trump, antagonizing the Trump base, until there comes a point where DeSantis, if this happens, DeSantis steps in next year. But
it's like Trump just stands there. He's like this giant rock in the middle of an ocean, and the waves just crash against him, and he just he just collects mass without really doing it. I mean, he's not even campaigning right now. I mean, he didn't go to the Iowa thing. I guess he does. Well, okay.
Well, he holds massive rallies, but he can basically, he's the 800-pound gorilla in the room or whatever.
Yeah,
he's just not. He's under no obligation, and he'll make it clear. Even with Tucker Carlson, I don't need to be here, and he's not wrong. I mean, that could change. It's definitely in the interest of all these candidates to make that change. Maybe Ramaswamy less so than most of the others, frankly. But for now, I don't see him making too many mistakes when it comes to winning over Republicans. And I'm just going to underline that point when it comes to winning over Republicans, because the general election is a very, very different situation where, again, I think, there's still many more months to go until even the first primaries and caucuses start, let alone, Super Tuesday comes around. But really those DeSantis people, they have a chance if they're able to operate with maybe a lighter touch to possibly position themselves in such a way as to win over voters who find Trump just absolutely intolerable. But
It's an interesting position they've put themselves in. They're running basically to the right of Trump. And I mean, Trump policy wise is just a straight down the middle centrist, almost like a 2000s Democrat in a lot of ways.
definitely.
And DeSantis is running to his right. And I think that if certain people were listening to this, they would laugh at what I just said about Trump, but it's true. So sorry, you can.
No, I 100% agree. You hear Trump talk about, for example, in Iowa, ethanol. He'll point out that on that issue, like leaving aside the merits and the negative side of ethanol subsidies, that's hugely important to Iowa's economy.
Yeah.
And if DeSantis can be said to have at some point in the past attempted to advance legislation to work against that, you can make a strong free market economic, maybe more conventionally conservative Republican case for that DeSantis legislation. But you know what? That's not going to play very well in Iowa.
No.
And that those are the realities that the DeSantis people need to grapple with without antagonizing MAGA, because it just seems so clear to me.
Yeah, just running to the right of Trump seems like a tough ticket to win over centrist voters who, I mean, it's almost like this understanding of left and right just kind of falls apart against a lot of this, what's going on now. I started to refer to it more as like establishment, anti-establishment. And, I think that paradigm might explain it better. I don't know. It's interesting, though, to think that he's trying to win over. I mean, like, who is he trying to win over with this anti-Trump stuff? Is it centrist voters? Because he's taken this very hard right attitude on a lot of woke stuff, and anyway.
I think in the minds of DeSantis staffers, maybe there's, first of all, I think this notion that, not inaccurately, we have so much money that we can kind of play around a bit, although obviously it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. At the same time, I think people are wedded to this narrative of the DeSantis competence and the notion that America really wants this Red Caesar-ish figure in DeSantis. I'm, skeptical that that's going to translate beyond the Republican primaries, and even there, it seems like maybe that might not be the best way to win people over in this particular contest against this particular main opponent.
He's clearly the most competent candidate, is the thing. Like, he's the most competent candidate by far.
You mean in terms of governance, not in terms of campaign?
He's got a track record. He understands how to navigate bureaucracy. We've seen that much. Vivek doesn't have any experience, and Trump's merits in that regard are specious at best at this point. I mean, he ran on dismantling the deep state, and I mean, as far as I know, he didn't get very far. And DeSantis has a track record of weakening the hold of these unaccountable entities better than any of the other candidates. So I don't know. I'm trying not to endorse anyone. I will at some point. I will. But like right now, it's just interesting to watch. Still very early, as you noted. A lot could change.
I mean, I almost wonder, given, and just frankly, I think there's a lot of Trump world that's very focused on creating and amplifying DeSantis gaps, but there is a real issue in terms of maybe relatability or just the handshaking, person to person campaigning element of it. And in that case, maybe leaning into a certain kind of remoteness and competence rather than doing the kind of conventional photo ops of yourself cooking or whatever, maybe that would register as more authentic, in the same way that Trump comes across as a regular guy, in part because he's not like rolling up his shirt sleeves. He's a rich dude who wears a nice suit. Yeah. A lot of people look at that and think, if I had that much money, I'd be, married to a supermodel and I'd dress like that, but I'd still, talk the way that Trump talks. So if DeSantis could find a way to really be himself and not have to, run around like Mitt Romney in 2012 or something, that just seems to me like it could be a better fit. But as you said, on the more substantive stuff, he has a very, very strong record. That can't be gainsaid.
I think what he needs to do heading into Iowa is get a bunch of pictures with him with his shirt off, in the fields. I think that would play well.
He's riding a bear through Montana or something.
Something like that. Riding a horse through Iowa, just shirt off around some corn. I think that would probably play well. I mean, Nathan, we're coming to the end of our time here. You've also, like I'll mention briefly for listeners, that you've done a great job covering the environmental beat from an angle that I think most listeners will appreciate. So I'll point people there to read more of your coverage there. Let's talk briefly about the piece you wrote about New Jersey battling this offshore wind farm. I find that interesting. What is that kind of a national trend that you're seeing in other states, or is it just concentrated locally in New Jersey or something?
Well, there's a very intense effort underway there, in part because of the rash of whale and dolphin deaths that corresponds to the surveying that's gone on off the coast of New Jersey and New York to put in these wind farms as part of this very aggressive push we've seen, partly with money made available last Congress through the Schumer Manchin bill. That, I think, combined with the fact that you've got these tourist-driven towns, or towns with a lot of people who want to have a nice view, looking in the not-so-distant future at this line of more than 1,000 feet tall, in some cases, windmills, less than 9 miles away from shore. I think that's like lit a fire under a lot of these communities. And one of the people I spoke with is a former, actually, head of the, I believe, Office of Compliance in the Department of Energy. So he was actually responsible for approving projects like this. And, I think he's a Democrat. In fact, the head of a club of local Democrats there. So he's not, a partisan Republican or something, but he told me, I look at this and I don't think that the environmental impact statement from the feds has been adequately thorough in looking at some of the hazards to whales, at some of the economic costs, all of these aspects of putting in these, really massive installations of hundreds of turbines. This is not like a single small turbine a few yards from shore. And so you have that. You have a lot of legislators, although not, the Democrats on the, New Jersey side. But you have all these people who I think in some ways make up a less than conventional coalition, because it is one of these, not in my backyard issues, but one where, you look at it and you can understand how this wouldn't be appealing. And especially when you have whales washing up on your beaches, that's not like some hypothetical future harm. That's something happening right now.
I grew up going to the beach in the Gulf in Alabama, like Gulf Shores, Orange Beach area. I don't know if you've ever been there. Beautiful place. The water's hot in the summer, though. And once you discover the Pacific Ocean, you kind of, I don't know. You kind of want to go to the Pacific Ocean instead of the Gulf. I still like the Gulf, but one of the features of the Gulf is the offshore oil rigs that you see. And growing up, you'd see those, and I guess they were kind of ugly, but no one got as inflamed about those. And I could theorize about why that is. I do think that the wind turbines, like if you've ever driven through parts of the country where they've got those over the whole hills, they're the first couple of times you see them, you're kind of in awe of them. They're giant. They're huge. But I imagine it has the effect of creating this like wall. If I'm looking out at the coast and I see just a line of windmills, I feel caged in, I don't want to feel caged in when I'm looking at the ocean. So I can understand how that's more upsetting than seeing and the rays are mostly visible at night when they're all lit up, and they're kind of cool to look at night. But, during the day, they're far enough away to where they don't totally obscure the view of the ocean and the illusion of it being endless. But I feel like the turbines just must create this wall.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind that it's not like there's a long history of massive oil rigs off the coast of New Jersey. These are people who generally, might not like that either. And again, these are communities where people, often people of means, just to underscore why this is why this ends up being a story in part, these are people who are retired or who have a vacation home or who live there, and really, like, they're not wrong to be concerned about the effect on the economy, on their property values, on, among other things, the environment, and then, you know, the ratepayers themselves, who are in, you know, a very different result than you would see with those oil rigs. Now they're going to be paying more as a consequence of the legislature and the governor approving this bid from the Danish company responsible for one of the developments going in, Ocean Wind 1, trying to now get this set of tax benefits that would have otherwise gone to the New Jersey ratepayers. So when you see all of those things together, I think it ultimately adds up to a very different picture than those oil rigs. Certainly, if you're looking at them from, like, you know, a southern state on the Gulf of Mexico, as opposed to you know, the Mid-Atlantic or the Northeast.
Are we just bored with affluence now? Like when the oil rigs were dotting the horizon, were we just so stoked on just the future that oil promised that we were willing to overlook the mark they made on the environment? Obviously, that's not the case for everyone. There are plenty of people who complain about those.
Yeah.
But anyway, we can answer that question next time. Nathan, great chatting with you. We'll see you around. I'll put a link to Nathan's author profile on the Epoch Times down here in the show notes, and you guys can check it out. Again, he's done a great job covering the presidential race, almost solely Vivek now, and has some great coverage of environmental issues such as what we just discussed. So, Nathan, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right, that's it with Nathan Worcester. I'm going to send us back. All right, guys, that's our show for the week. I'll be back next week with a whole bunch of new stuff for you to listen to and discuss. Tomorrow, Megan's at noon. Jared is Friday at noon, so be sure to tune into those. If you don't catch these live, I mean, if I'm talking to you, you're listening live right now. Well, I can't guarantee that, but we do upload these on YouTube. So if you're catching this end of it and you want to watch the whole thing, it'll be up on the YouTube page. It's there now, actually. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.